Most people say they are afraid of getting old, but psychologically, aging itself is not the real source of fear. Wrinkles are not the fear. Slower bodies are not the fear. Even death in its abstract form is rarely the true fear. What people are afraid of is something quieter and deeper. They are afraid that time will expose an unfinished life. Psychologically, fear of aging is not fear of the future. It is fear of evaluation. As time passes, life begins to feel less like an open field and more like a record. Years accumulate. Choices become visible. Patterns can no longer be ignored. For many people, aging feels like being slowly audited by reality. This is why fear of aging often appears strongest, not in old age, but in midlife, when youth is gone, but meaning is still unclear. At this stage, people begin to ask questions they have avoided for years. Did my life go in the right direction? Did I become who I thought I would be? Did I choose consciously or simply follow momentum? Aging turns these questions from abstract thoughts into psychological pressure. People who fear getting old often live with a postponed sense of self. They feel that their real life has not started yet. They may have a job, relationships, routines, and responsibilities. But internally, they still feel like they are waiting to feel confident, waiting to feel ready, waiting to finally become someone. As long as time feels abundant, this waiting feels safe. But aging introduces scarcity, and scarcity turns waiting into anxiety. Psychologically, many people organize their identity around potential. Potential is comforting because it protects the ego. If you are still becoming, you cannot yet be judged. But time slowly removes this protection. Potential demands realization, and realization involves limitation, failure, and compromise. People who fear aging often fear becoming specific. Specific means choosing one life and losing all others. Aging forces specificity. This is why some people experience a strong sense of panic as birthdays pass. Not because of the number itself, but because the number closes doors. People who do not fear aging relate to time differently. They do not experience time as a narrowing tunnel. They experience it as a deepening space. This difference begins early, long before old age. People who fear aging often build their self-worth externally. They measure themselves through comparison, recognition, achievement, and visibility. These metrics work well in youth-driven systems, but they are unstable. As soon as attention shifts to younger, faster, newer individuals, the sense of worth collapses. Psychologically, this creates dependency. If value comes from being seen, aging feels like disappearance. People who do not fear getting old usually develop an internal reference for worth. Their sense of value is not constantly negotiated with the outside world. They know who they are, even when no one is watching. This internal anchoring reduces the psychological shock of aging. Another major source of aging anxiety is the belief that life follows a linear timeline. Study by a certain age, succeed by another, settle down, peak, then decline. When people internalize this model, aging becomes a countdown. Every year feels like a missed checkpoint. Psychologically mature individuals understand something different. They understand that development is non-linear. Some people find their direction late. Some discover meaning after loss. Some grow emotionally only after failure. Time does not reward speed, it rewards integration. People who fear aging often confuse movement with growth. They stay busy to avoid reflection. They chase stimulation to avoid silence. But aging brings more silence. If a person has not learned how to exist without distraction, silence becomes threatening. People who do not fear aging often have a strong relationship with solitude, not isolation. Solitude, They can sit with themselves without needing constant stimulation. This ability is essential because aging naturally reduces external noise. When external noise fades, inner structure matters. Another important psychological factor is emotional avoidance. People who avoid uncomfortable emotions early in life often fear aging more intensely. Why? Because aging brings unresolved emotional material to the surface. Grief that was postponed, regret that was ignored, disappointment that was never processed. Time does not erase emotional debt, it compounds it. People who regularly reflect, grieve, and adjust earlier in life carry less emotional weight later. They are not afraid of what time will reveal. Fear of aging is also closely tied to identity rigidity. People who cling to a fixed self-image experience aging as erosion. Bodies change, energy shifts, social roles evolve. If identity is tied to appearance, productivity, or social position, aging feels like loss of self. People who do not fear aging have a more flexible identity. They expect change. They do not interpret transformation as failure. They understand identity as something that updates, not something that must be preserved. Psychological flexibility reduces existential fear. Without it, aging feels like collapse. With it, aging feels like transition. Another hidden source of aging anxiety is unresolved comparison. Many people evaluate their life not on its own terms, but against others. Who is ahead? Who succeeded earlier? Who appears happier? As long as time feels infinite, comparison feels tolerable. As time passes, comparison becomes cruel. People who do not fear aging tend to disengage from comparison earlier. They stop measuring life horizontally. They measure it vertically: depth, coherence, understanding. This shift is psychological maturity. Fear of aging often intensifies when life lacks narrative coherence. If life feels like a series of disconnected events, aging feels meaningless. But when life is understood as a story, aging becomes a chapter rather than an ending. People who do not fear getting old often see their life as unfinished, but not empty. They are curious about who they will become when urgency fades. Curiosity replaces dread. This curiosity is not optimism, it is openness. Finally, fear of aging is often fear of death in disguise, but not fear of dying. Fear of having lived inauthentically. When people live according to external expectations, aging becomes terrifying because it confirms that time was spent serving something that was never truly theirs. People who live in alignment with internal values experience less existential panic, even if life was difficult, even if outcomes were imperfect. Authenticity softens the awareness of impermanence. People who do not fear getting old do not deny loss. They simply do not interpret loss as failure. They understand that nothing meaningful remains static, including the self. Aging, psychologically, is not about decline. It is about consolidation. Those who fear aging fear becoming invisible. Those who do not fear aging realize that visibility was never the point. They do not become younger, they become more themselves. People who do not fear getting old are often misunderstood. From the outside, they may appear calm, detached, or even indifferent to time. But psychologically, their peace is not the result of denial. It is the result of resolution. They have resolved certain internal conflicts that others postpone. One of the most important differences lies in how these individuals relate to meaning. For many people, meaning is something expected from the future, a better version of life, a later stage where everything finally makes sense. This expectation creates pressure. When meaning is postponed, aging feels like a threat because it reduces the remaining time for fulfillment. People who do not fear aging do not locate meaning in the future. They locate it in continuity. Meaning for them is not a destination. It is a relationship with life that evolves over time. They do not ask, "What will my life become?" They ask, "What has my life been teaching me?" This shift is subtle but powerful. It transforms aging from a countdown into a dialogue. Another defining trait of people who do not fear getting old is their relationship with regret. They do not live regret-free lives. They have made mistakes. They have lost opportunities. They have disappointed themselves. But psychologically, they do not freeze around these memories. They allow regret to inform them rather than define them. People who fear aging often carry regret as unresolved tension. They replay past decisions without integration. They imagine alternative lives without accepting the one they lived. As time passes, these unresolved loops become heavier. People who do not fear aging have processed regret earlier. They have grieved what did not happen. They have mourned the life they did not live. This grieving is essential. Without grief, acceptance is impossible. And without acceptance, aging feels like punishment. There is also a profound difference in how these individuals relate to achievement. People who fear aging often define themselves through expansion, more success, more recognition, more accumulation. This mindset works well early in life, but it becomes unstable over time. Expansion cannot continue indefinitely. People who do not fear aging understand this. They gradually shift from expansion to refinement. Instead of asking, "How much more can I gain?" they ask, "What is worth keeping?" This psychological pruning creates clarity. As external ambition softens, internal discernment sharpens. They become less reactive, not because they care less, but because they understand more. Another important distinction lies in how these individuals experience identity. People who fear aging often feel threatened by change. They want to remain recognizable to themselves and others. Aging disrupts this familiarity. People who do not fear aging expect identity to change. They are not invested in preserving a particular image. They understand that identity is not a possession. It is a process. Because of this, physical aging does not feel like an attack on the self. It feels like an update in form, not a loss of essence. This psychological flexibility allows them to age without panic. They do not fight change, they cooperate with it. There is also a notable difference in how people who do not fear aging relate to comparison. They disengage from it earlier. They stop measuring themselves against others' timelines. They stop asking whether they are ahead or behind. Comparison loses its relevance when a person develops a personal metric for meaning. Instead of asking, "How am I doing compared to others?" they ask, "Am I living in alignment with what matters to me?" This internal calibration reduces anxiety. Without constant comparison, time becomes less hostile. People who do not fear getting old also tend to have a healthier relationship with their limitations. They do not interpret limitation as failure. They see it as structure. Limits clarify priorities. When time feels infinite, choices feel overwhelming. When time becomes finite, choices become meaningful. This is one of the paradoxes of aging. Constraint increases significance. People who fear aging experience limitation as loss. People who do not fear aging experience it as focus. Another key difference is how these individuals relate to emotional depth. People who fear aging often chase intensity, high emotion, high stimulation, high novelty. Aging naturally reduces intensity. For those dependent on intensity, this feels like fading. People who do not fear aging value depth over intensity. They appreciate subtlety, nuance, quiet understanding. As emotional peaks flatten, emotional richness increases. They do not feel less, They feel more precisely. There is also an existential dimension to this psychological orientation. People who do not fear getting old have usually confronted mortality directly, not in a dramatic way, but honestly. They have allowed the reality of impermanence to shape their values. Because of this, aging does not come as a shock. It is not a betrayal. It is expected. Fear often comes from surprise. Acceptance comes from familiarity. Another important factor is how these individuals relate to usefulness. People who fear aging often equate worth with productivity. When productivity declines, worth feels threatened. People who do not fear aging separate usefulness from value. They understand that being valuable does not always mean being efficient. Presence matters. Perspective matters. Wisdom matters. Their role shifts. They are less interested in producing and more interested in contributing. This transition reduces fear, because worth no longer depends on output. People who do not fear aging also tend to have a more realistic view of happiness. They do not expect constant satisfaction. They accept fluctuation. They understand that life contains seasons of expansion and contraction. Aging becomes another season, not the end of the cycle, but a change in rhythm. Finally, people who do not fear getting old have integrated their past. They do not deny who they were. They do not romanticize it either. They carry their earlier selves with compassion. This integration creates internal continuity. When past, present, and future feel connected, time feels less threatening. Aging no longer feels like separation. It feels like progression. They do not become fearless. They become grounded. They do not escape loss. They contextualize it. They do not cling to youth. They absorb experience. Psychologically, people who do not fear getting old are not resisting time. They are in relationship with it. And in that relationship, fear loses its dominance. Not because life becomes easier, but because life becomes clearer.